Hey, Bad Jew fam, welcome to the new episode of Bad Jew. This week's episode was actually recorded just a little under a year ago, which is really crazy to say out loud. The reason why is because we were going to do an episode about this very important topic, the Holocaust, and October 7th happened, which totally changed up the entire content counter. I had to shift a bunch of episodes around. And so naturally, the show's focus went towards what is currently happening in Israel, and then eventually went towards that. This episode, though, still couldn't be more relevant, especially during this week, the week of Yom HaShoah. Michael Ruskin's story is more important right now than it ever has been. You should seriously go check out his book, The Vow, available now. Thanks for listening.
Baruch Hashem, you're a bad Jew.
Shalom.
This is Bad Jew, the place where there is no such thing as a bad Jew. Thank you so much for choosing this Jewish learning podcast. There are thousands out there, but you chose Bad Jew to gain your Jewish learning content. Please, we ask that you subscribe. We ask that you leave a review on Apple Podcasts. We ask that you engage in our content on TikTok and Instagram and on YouTube. Please do leave your comments. Please give us your insights. We love hearing from you, the fans, the Bad Jew fam of this show. We are so appreciative of that. Thank you. Thank you. With us today is a very fascinating guest. This gentleman, Michael Ruskin, has been globetrotting across the world promoting his new book, The Vow, a Love Story. He even was kind enough to give me my own free copy here. Michael, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. I'm being very excited about being here and with your audience.
Well, it's my pleasure. And again, my gratitude it extends to you as well. We're really grateful to have you here. Where are you calling from again today?
I'm right outside of Atlanta, Georgia. The city is Alpharetta, Georgia, about 20 minutes north.
There we go. Okay, well, so long as you're happy over there north of Atlanta, then I'm happy over here in Los Angeles. All right. Okay, awesome. Well, Michael, as you know, all the guests on this podcast, they withstand what we call the Bad Jew Challenge. That is telling your life story in 4 minutes. It is a rite of entry onto this podcast. Are you ready?
I am ready.
Excellent. Echad, shtaim, shalosh, yalla.
As everyone knows, I'm originally from Brooklyn, New York, specifically Borough Park. I came here as the last surviving member of my family I'm currently. And at the time, my parents arrived in Ellis Island in 1948. They landed in right outside of Brooklyn, and that's where I was raised for the first 5 years. I had a older brother who ended up passing away in 2008, which made me the last surviving member of my family. My parents went through the Holocaust. They spent 4.5 years in captivity between the Kovna ghetto in Lithuania and the concentration camps of Stutthof. When I arrived, we stayed in Brooklyn, New York for about 5 years, at which time my parents moved to New Jersey. And I want to let you know that I came from a rather poor family. My father was an electrician. He worked in a paint factory. And my mom worked as a seamstress, sewing hems on dresses for people. So they were very poor, but in the end, they made a very good life for themselves. Being raised by Holocaust parents, it was not easy. I had a sister who was 3.5 years old, who was taken by the Germans in 1944. She would have been my older sister. And with her death and then coming to this country, my parents were very, very protective of both my brother and myself, having my sister literally taken out of the arms of my mother in 1944. So growing up, my mother would walk me to school every day while my friends were with their playmates in second and third grade. I only spoke Yiddish until I got into the second grade. So when I was speaking to my classmates, they didn't understand the word I was saying. They thought I was from Mars. So in the home, it was Yiddish. And then I learned English as I got older, and I'm still struggling with it to this day. But it was a very difficult time because my mother had to tend to smother me. She would stand in the schoolyard at 3 o'clock, getting out of work early just to walk me home every day while my classmates were walking with their friends. And this is how it was through the second and third grade. So it was a pretty difficult time for me because I never had a chance to breathe. She was always making sure I was okay. Obviously they were influenced by what happened in the camps. My father and mother, they ended up having certain behavior patterns that were not normal. Like, for instance, at the table for dinner, they would eat very fast. They were also conservative Jews. I went to a conservative Orthodox shul, and there I was bar mitzvahed. Uh, and so I came from that kind of family. They were very tied into the, the their past in a way, and they wanted me to be raised in that kind of environment that sent me to a yeshiva and become a rabbi like my mother's family and my uncles did. But rather, I'd be going out playing baseball and football and throwing a basketball with my neighborhood friends than reading the Bible. So it was not an easy task, because my mother would get angry at me for not focusing on Judaism as much as they wanted me to. But anyway, so it was a tough childhood. I could remember on Thursday nights they would go food shopping. They would come home with rolls and rolls of toilet paper, and obviously they never got enough. My closet was full from the floor to the ceiling with toilet paper every week they go, because obviously when they were in the camps, they didn't have such a luxury. So the growing up was very confining, I would say. The word is confining.
Mm.
They were very, very strict with me, and they would always want to know where I was going and when I was coming home. And until I got to college, it was a tough road. But fortunately, I went away to college, and that made me blossom to the point where I am today.
Well, very fascinating, Michael. Thank you so much for sharing. I went ahead and put the ticker at the bottom here for everyone to go ahead and check out The Vow, a love story here on your website. It's self-published by you, which I think is very admirable and pretty amazing. A lot of people kind of go the easy route and sell their books on Amazon. They publish, but not only is that a terrible business model, but also it's just quite simply, it's not beneficial to the author itself. This right here is a great way to support the independent writer himself. The Vow is an incredible book. I did my homework. You gave me a free copy. I'm very, very grateful. And you described some scenes here that are, written in this book. The scene where your sister at 3 years old gets ripped from the hands of your mother is one of the most tragic chapters I've ever read in my life. And it's harrowing. It's an incredibly difficult chapter to read. What I find really, really fascinating about this book, though, The Vow, is that just as the subtitle implies here, is that, most Holocaust books are, Holocaust history, how I survived. And this does have a deep element of that, but this is also a love story. This is about how your parents, despite the separation, when they were separated in the ghettos, found their way back to each other and created a new life for themselves. And thus, you're here. And that's such a miracle. What a blessing that you are here, that you had the chance to carry on their message, to continue to put their story out there. It's really, really amazing. And so, I gotta commend you and the Ruskin family for being here and alive, and that you are here today to carry out that message.
Thank you.
So I think that's pretty amazing.
Thank
I
you.
also gotta imagine, now that you're the only child, I'm an only child too, so I'm speaking from experience here. Do you feel a certain sense of pressure to carry out this narrative?
Well, I wouldn't call it pressure. I would call it, but I'm privileged to have this opportunity. There's so few of us that are in a position where my parents had a special message that they left us. So this book is more inspirational. What they exhibited through the years, Chaz, was the fact that they exhibited the strength of the human spirit, the faith, the love, the courage that they wanted to leave me and my brother. That message was kind of muddled because they never really spoke about their experiences when they were alive. And I do want to add also that the information you just shared, that's all in documents I found in my father's night table in 1993. After my father passed away, I went over to the condo because my brother and I were going to sell the condo. And as I was cleaning up his bedroom, I found this envelope in his night table, and in there were testimonies from my mom and dad to lawyers and doctors that were petitioning the German courts in Munich in 1964 for reparations.
Wow.
So everything you find, it's the most incredible journey. And a lot of this information you found, I didn't even know about until I read those documents back in 1993. So it was quite a shock.
It really is incredible. Thank you so much for sharing that. I didn't realize that. Everyone, please go to the vow a love story.com to purchase this specific episode. I actually wanted to focus on the afterword. You know, a lot of people, they know a lot of YJPs, that's the primary audience here of this podcast. They focus, they really do know the history of the Holocaust. But when I went to the when I read through this book, the part that struck me the most that I think is very relevant to today, I want to set the tone with this part is the afterword of your book. So it's not really a spoiler alert per se, but I want to read here kind of some of the things that you said that you kind of reflected that you just shared earlier. I'm going to just go ahead and read it here. This is what you wrote in your afterword. My parents did not come from wealth after the war, nor did they achieve wealth in their lifetime. They had qualities that were much more important. They showed love and kindness from within, and people could sense their authenticity. They were simply blue collar, hardworking people who were grateful to be alive and living the American dream. I believe my brother and I gave them purpose. They raised us in a culturally bound Jewish home in the middle class neighborhood, and they made sure we had good education, good morals, and were responsible for our lives. My parents also had other qualities and were greatly admired. In a nutshell, they were very resilient, strong, and determined, qualities which proved essential for their survival during the war and helped them establish productive lives in America. Later on, you go on to say, I really had a difficult time connecting to what my parents had gone through in Lithuania. I'm going to read more. I'm going to read more in a second. I'm going to let the audience,
Sure.
do more of the reading soon.
Sure.
But I think that gives a pretty good nutshell into the topic of this episode. You know, what was it like growing up with, Holocaust survivors? And so it sounds like there's a lot of survival instincts that really stuck with your parents even after the war was over. How did that have an impact on you?
Well, I mean, we were people that never gave up. We always were optimistic, and we were determined to find a good life. And they kind of instilled that in both my brother and I. And it was tough considering they lost their families on both sides of the family, and they still had the spirit and the will to just keep moving forward and not reminiscing the past. So that's one of the reasons why they never spoke about it. In fact, when you think about it, Chaz, in '64, when my parents were being interviewed by the doctors and the attorneys, this was almost 15 years after the war, and they had to go back and regurgitate all of those experiences 15 years later. That was then written and then sent to the courts. You could imagine how difficult it was to have to go back and tell the attorney what happened back then. And, what happened with me was I didn't really connect with them that way because they never really spoke about this. I can remember sitting in the den in my house watching The World at War, which is a documentary, and sitting on the couch with my mother and father, and I'm watching this, and on the screen were where they were, and I couldn't connect what I was watching on the screen to the two people that were sitting to my right because they really never spoke about it. I mean, my mother mentioned my sister once about that she had a daughter, and then she basically mentioned one part how my father reunited with my mom almost 2.5 months after they were in separate concentration camps. And I'm not going to go into how well but I mean it's an incredible story how they finally got back together again.
Right. And you have to read the book to
Yeah, yeah,
understand
right.
exactly what we're talking about. Because again, we don't want to give away too many spoiler alerts here.
Right.
Well, I do find that really fascinating. And that actually lines up with something that Roz Rothstein said. Roz Rothstein was another guest on this podcast. We very cleverly named her episode, Why Should They Stand With Us? And that was about Israel advocacy to people who are not Jewish. And Roz Rothstein, CEO of Stand With Us, on the podcast. And she talked about in her 4-minute Bad Jew challenge how her parents didn't really talk about the Holocaust for the beginning, and that's because they were protecting you. And I find that really fascinating because, yeah, I mean, how do you tell your children that you survived such horrors? And how do you illustrate them without giving them nightmares? You want to protect them.
Right.
It's very sensitive.
Right.
What would you say, taking a slightly different approach to this conversation, independently with your father? I'm going to do this for your mother as well. But independently with your father, is there any specific memory where it clicked that this was very clearly like that this mannerism, this habit, this behavior was very clearly from the was from the Holocaust, that it passed on through time like that? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. No. I didn't relate to their behavior, um, to what happened back then. I know my father was a very quiet man. He was very, very responsible. He got up every day and went to the factory every day and provided for my brother and I. They also weren't very demonstrative as far as saying how much they loved me, whether they hugged me, kissed me. They just were they were in many respects emotionally kind of shut down when it came to showing a lot of emotions because they had to, Chaz. They had to shut that part. That's the only way they would have gotten through the war because it was such an emotional experience losing their daughter and their families. They had to shut that part down. So they were kind of distant in a way. I remember when I was older, I would go into the condo visiting my parents from out of town. I would always kiss my father on the cheek. It's a very European thing. And my mother was very kind of stoic, but she was a very giving person, but it wasn't shown in demonstrative ways like verbally or physical way of kissing me or holding me. That rarely ever happened. And that
I'm
was
sorry.
what happened.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that. I'm sorry to hear that.
Yes, Josh, you understand that they were smothering. My mom was very smothering. That is the way she showed her love by being very protective. And so I could understand because to her that was safe.
Right. Right. It was natural and it made sense, and it was about her instincts, the survival instinct that they picked up during the war. So tragic. At what point did it begin to click? What point were you able to connect your parents to the Holocaust, to everything that happened?
It was after my father passed away in '93. Basically it was those documents.
So post mortem, your father's writings, your parents' writings, I should say. That's when everything started to click. And how'd that impact you when you really begin to
Oh, it
realize
was it was devastating, devastating. When I remember sitting in the bedroom in the condo, and I remember reading the documents, and I was just frozen. I mean, on my heart was in my feet when I started getting into the specifics of what happened to my dad and my mom. And then I started to realize more at that point how much of an influence that must have been raising my brother and I. And so yeah, it was before that it was, I just didn't connect the way they probably would have wanted me to. But again, it was because they were shut down. That's the
man?
reason I wrote the book, is because I feel now that I know, I feel guilty that I didn't really show how much I appreciate and love them and how much I admired them. And the only thing I could do now is to keep their legacy alive by doing what I'm doing so people know who they are and to know that, and they know how much I love them by the book that I'm writing and the travels I'm making to make presentations.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I'm sure that they are proud of you and that you carry out their memory in such a honorable way. If you could redo anything about your relationship with your parents when they were alive, what would it be?
I would have I would have thanked them and told them how proud I am as their son to be to what they had gone through. And I would just been much more sensitive to where they came from growing up in Europe. Because I just didn't know as much. I mean, even back then, people didn't even know where the country of Lithuania was. I mean, you had to look on a map and you couldn't even know where this country was along the Baltic. People didn't know, they never heard of the city. And so I knew of Lithuania, but I didn't know much. It was only through my research. And, I think a lot of this was shared. It was meant to be, but it was going to happen after they had already gone. And so now I'm spending 16 hours a day working on getting podcasts and getting in front of people, social media, and making sure that people know how incredible these two people were to have raised the family and to have what they went through and to still have productive lives.
Yeah, it's true. And, to speak on that, when we had met last month, I was hoping we'd meet the week after. And you said, no, we'll meet in a month. And ironically, that was at a time when my cachet for episodes in the can for the following weeks to come was very low. So when you first said that to me, I remember my stomach getting all knotted up because like, oh
Yeah.
no, now I have to wait a month to possibly get content. And I'm not sure I'll have enough to for Michael by then, but luckily we were able to persevere. No, I think that's really beautiful. Did you ever go back to Lithuania? Did you ever go back to any of the locations that your parents ever mentioned? And do you ever want to?
No, I do want to. I want to get over there to Europe. I'm right now. I've spoken to the BBC in London. I've spoken to Ukraine, Australia, and I'm trying to get into Paris and Berlin. So I got things going out over there, but I definitely want to get back. I know people have been to Lithuania. It's a beautiful country, but I mean, there's still remnants of the war, and there's still a tremendous amount of anti-Semitism.
Sure, sure. And how, now that you have seen at least what we hope is the worst of what anti-Semitism could be, when you see modern day anti-Semitism today, how does that impact you?
It's one of the reasons I'm here. It makes me realize that not much has changed. In fact, it's getting worse as time goes on. I mean, the deniers and the anti-Semitic remarks that are coming out all over the place. It makes me very steadfast that there's a message. We got to make sure these people are educated to know what happened and how much that could happen again if we stay divided. And that's their whole goal. Their goal is to divide people so they can conquer. And that's exactly what's happening now. They're trying to divide. And so my goal is to bring people together through love, through perseverance, that we all have that spirit within ourselves to do what we have to do during times that, we're faced with real challenges.
I, I I love that, and that's why your book here is especially unique, is because again it's a love story. So you're really putting out love out there, just as you said.
Right. That's a big part because, as I said, if they didn't have those qualities, those attributes, they would never have made it, Chaz. It
Right.
was their love for each other, their courage, their faith in God. That's what kept them alive. And you got to remember, they suffered together and they also suffered apart because my parents were put in separate concentration camps for nearly 8 months. And you can imagine, you don't even know if your spouse is going to live, whether you'll ever see them again. So here they lose their daughter and then they're separated. And that's where the vow came in because they made a vow that on the train platform, if they were to live, they were to go back to where they first met 5 years earlier. So they had a reason to live. It gave them motivation. They had a future and they would not give up the fact that someday they believed they would come back together, and they did.
Yeah, that part, when I read that, and I suddenly understood why it was called the vow, it choked me up because there's so much uncertainty. There's so much, that might have been potentially the last time they ever spoke to each other. What a miracle that they were able to find each other after
Well,
all of that, after all the
well,
horrors that they witnessed, after their liberations.
well,
It's it's insane. And even after their liberation, it didn't guarantee their survival either, which is
no,
incredible. Because if you read the story, for those who are listening here, even after their liberation, they still had a lot of different obstacles to go around, from people suspecting that the father was a spy, to the mother and the sister, Dora, surviving the Russians when they liberated them, because the Russians were not afraid to create casualties because they were just collateral.
right.
It was scary. It was a really, really
No,
scary time.
they had a
And I
hard
don't
life, Chaz. They had a hard life.
Yeah, they really did. They really did. I think there are certain parts of the history here as well that, I really did around my brain around. The part that really struck me, the historical fact that really struck me in this book was that, even though, we've always seen the visual in the Jewish community. I'm preaching to the choir here. We've seen the visual from movies and also from some of the photographs taken of the time, stacks of bodies piling out of train cars, right? But you also mentioned that there was a high sum of money in the train car aspect, where a lot of the Jews were forced to pay to get into those cars as
Yeah,
well.
that was shocking. When I
That
did,
was shocking. I never heard that before.
yeah, they actually had to pay to get onto the car to go to the concentration camp. So they didn't know. They thought they were just being resettled, and it was all based on what you can afford. So here they were paying to go to their death. They had first class tickets, and then those who couldn't pay were put into the boxcars, and then a lot of them died in the boxcars. And as you know, remember in the Dachau part in the concentration camps, they didn't even open the boxcars towards the end because the camp was so overcrowded that they left them in the cars, which eventually they died. But yeah, they
It,
had to actually pay. They actually had to pay to get onto the cars in
Ye
many instances.
yeah, and there's a lot of historical facts there, and, in your discovery of the history here, again, I know that you grew up, you weren't connecting the dots because you hadn't made that connection, your parents didn't talk about it as much. When you finally did make that connection, what was the discovery process like for the history?
Well, it started with the documents.
Right.
And that's what spurred me on to start doing a lot of research online and talking to Yad Vashem in Jerusalem and the Holocaust Museum. And it was eye eye opening. I mean, so much information that people didn't know about and that I didn't even know about. And so for me, it was the first time I'm reading about the suffering and the death and the heroic examples of some people. Like I call my parents the shining light because, my book is based on the fact it's supposed to be an uplifting book because a lot of them never thought they would make it, but yet my parents were strong enough and they had that spiritual connection to believe that they would make it. So those people who still live productive lives after the war were real heroes.
They really
So I
were.
try to focus more on those that survived and how they came about of their survival and how they built lives together after the war.
It's really, you're absolutely right, and it's a wonderful focus. I think it's an important distinction because it really shows, the triumph of the human spirit, and I think that triumph of human spirit denotes and undermines all of the anti-Semitic tropes that have been thrown our way. You know,
Right. Right.
I think that's really the biggest thing is that just by surviving, they are a testament to how weak anti-Semitism is at its core, and how really minuscule the self-esteems are of the people that put it out there. So I think it's wonderful. I wanted to ask you as well, did you and your family ever visit Israel?
Yes. My parents actually lived in Netanya, which is on the coast for about 6 months. And then they came back because it was too hard for my folks back then. I went to Israel for 2 weeks back in the early 90s. And being in Jerusalem to me was as close to God as I ever feel like I got. But it was an incredible experience. I'd go back. I do want to get back there as well because I got some people in Israel that are very interested in my book and they want me to come out there. But yeah, I spent 2 weeks in Israel. I thought it was an incredible experience that I'll leave with me the rest of my life. And I learned a lot by being over there. The Israelis are really tough people. And brother, we need people like that around us because they're tough. And we should all be that way when it comes to people that deny that the Holocaust happened. And a lot of them don't even want us to be around. They look at us as an inferior people. And that goes back to the days of Hitler and Goering and Goebbels giving all that propaganda back then that they wanted to rid the Jews because it brought down the human race. It was just crazy stuff, just crazy talk.
What's the everlasting message you want people to leave this show with?
I just want people to understand that the strength of the human spirit is what we all need to strive to, and we all have that within ourselves. The premise of the book was that love, courage, faith, perseverance, and connection with yourself as well as with others is the way we get through life in the best possible position that we can be in. Because it's all about love, and we all have to feel that way towards being who we are, and we stand up for what we believe. And a lot of people, are still trying to find that peace.
Well, Michael, thank you so much for sharing your experiences growing up. Thank you for the free copy of The Vow, a Love Story. Get your own copy on thevowalovestory.com. Go ahead and use that ticker. It'll also be linked in the show notes of the episode below. This is not available on Amazon. This is not available in typical bookstores. This is self-published by the man, the myth, the legend himself, Michael Ruskin, globetrotter, activist. There's a lot of different labels we can throw on you, but how do you like to identify in this case?
I consider myself to be a messenger of truth, love, and courage.
There you have it. Messenger of truth, love, and courage. Please do go to thevowlovestory.com. Look at the information there. Be sure to buy the book. It's really, really incredible. Michael, thanks again for being here on the podcast. For those who are a part of the Bad Jew WhatsApp community, this was a question asked by the Bad Jew WhatsApp community. If you are interested in being a part of it, feel free to email me at badjewpod@gmail.com, or fill out the intake form in the link in the bio of my Instagram account. And we hope that you participate, subscribe, engage with us, continue to ask us questions in our community, and so on and so forth. Thank you again for listening to this podcast. We'll see you next time.
Shalom.